We're on page 5 of our Chapter 9 notes, the second packet of them. We're going to be finishing up our Chapter 9 notes today. The last section of Chapter 9 is section 9.8. What we're going to do today is find two values of theta. What that means is we're going to find two different angles. So maybe you want to put a note in there. Two different angles. That's what it means by two values of theta, because theta is just an angle measure, like maybe it's 100 degrees or 220 degrees. So we're going to find two different angles given its trig function. So what we're going to be given is the sine of the angle, or the cosine of the angle, or the tangent of the angle. One of those three things is going to be given to us. As a decimal or as a fraction, usually we're given a decimal. And what we're going to do is, instead of just finding one angle that has a given sine, or a given cosine, or a given tangent, we're going to find two. And those two angles are going to be between 0 and 360 degrees. The two angles that we find, the two values of theta, are going to be from two different quadrants. And those quadrants are going to be given, or we're going to figure out those quadrants depending on the all students take chemistry trick to figure out whether the sine, cosine, or tangent is going to be negative or positive. So what does this all mean? Well, if you take a look at these problems below, these couple of questions right here, we're given the sine of an angle as a particular number. In example 2, we're given the cosine. And what we're going to have to find is the angle. We're going to have to figure out the angle who has a sine equal to this. And there's not just one angle, but there are going to be two angles that we're going to find that has a sine equal to this. And the way to find out those two angles is by going through these three steps. First of all, we're just going to draw this little quadrant up here that has an ASTC in it. All students take chemistry, and that's going to tell us what two quadrants our answers are going to come from. So once we look at that, we're going to write down the two quadrants, like maybe it's quadrants 1 and 4, for example. We're going to write down two quadrants that our answers are going to come from, whether or not what we're given is a positive or a negative number. Once we figure out the two quadrants that our answer is going to come from, we're going to take our calculator out, make sure we're in degrees mode. Maybe you want to write that down again, degrees mode, because if you're not in degrees mode, you're going to get the wrong answers. So we're going to get a reference angle by doing the inverse trig button, which means second sine or second cosine. The inverse button is that little second button right here. Inverse is this blue. It's blue on my calculator. So we're going to do second sine or second cosine or second tangent to get an angle. And we're going to use the positive given trig value. So we're given a trig value. If this trig value is negative, like in example 2, we're going to change this negative to a positive so we can get our reference angle correctly. So our calculator will give us a reference angle, and that will be the reference angle for our two answers. And then once we figure out the reference angle, and we figure out which two quadrants our answers are going to come from, then we're going to find the actual value of the angle. Well, if the angle is coming from quadrant 1, then whatever the reference angle is, whatever our calculator tells us, that is one of the answers. If our answer is coming from quadrant 2, we take the reference angle and subtract it from 180 to get our answer. If our answer is coming from quadrant 3, we take our answer and add it to 180 degrees. And if our answer is coming from quadrant 4, we take our reference angle and subtract it from 360 degrees. And then we're done. And what does this all mean? Here's a perfect example. We're given a sine of an angle is 0.5839, and we want to know two values of theta between 0 and 360 degrees. We're going to get two answers to this one question. So step one says we're going to draw this little all students take chemistry, little grid, all students take chemistry. And then we're going to look at this value of sine. This value is a positive number. 0.5839 is a positive number. So when the sine is a positive value, the two quadrants where sine is positive are quadrants 1 and 2. So we've figured out that our two answers are going to come from quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. So we'll write those two down. The next step is to grab our calculator and do a second sine of 0.5839. So we have to make sure we press our mode button and change the mode to degrees. Mine was in radians. And then do second sine of 0.5839. That will give our angle, our reference angle. So we're going to round these to the nearest degree, I believe. Yep, to the nearest degree. So this will round to 36 degrees. And that's our reference angle. So we'll write down reference angle is equal to 36 degrees, and that's from our calculator. And then step 3 says, based on the two quadrants, what is our answer? So because our answer is coming from quadrant 1, our quadrant 1 angle, we're going to say theta is equal to 36 degrees. The reference angle is the answer. And then we're going to say our other answer is from quadrant 2. So in quadrant 2, our theta value is equal to, well, in quadrant 2, we do 180 minus the reference angle. So 180 minus 36 is 144 degrees. So those are our two answers, 144 and 36. And that's the end. So we know that the sine of 36 is 0.5839, or pretty close anyways, because we've rounded. And the sine of 144 is also equal to that. The next thing we have is a cosine. But we have a negative cosine, so you should circle that, you should point to it, that is a negative value. So a negative cosine. Well, we'll look up here, all students take chemistry says the cosine is positive in 1 and 4, so it must be negative in quadrants 2 and 3. So down here in step 1, we're going to draw our little all students take chemistry, and because cosine is negative, we'll check those two. Our answers are coming from quadrants 2 and 3 because cosine is positive in 1 and 4. Step 2 says let's find our reference angle. So watch this. We are not going to enter second cosine of a negative. We want to get, and you should write this down. We're going to type in our calculator, second cosine of positive 0.3828, because if we put a negative in here, it's going to mess us up. It's not going to give us the right reference angle. Second cosine of positive 0.3828. And our reference angle is 67 degrees. That's the reference angle. That's not the answer. 67 degrees. The two quadrants that our answers are coming from are quadrants 2 and 3. So in quadrant 2, our angle is theta, and we calculate it by doing 180 minus 67. So 180 minus 67 is 113 degrees. So that's one answer. And in quadrant 3, that's where our other answer is coming from. Quadrant 3, we take a look up here, and in quadrant 3 you do 180 plus the reference angle. So theta, our angle, is equal to 180 plus 67 degrees, and that turns out to be 247 degrees. So there are the two answers, quadrant 2, quadrant 3. Those two quadrants are where cosine goes negative. And the other things that we're going to do are just the same type of steps. It's just getting more practice on this. So question number 3, we have a tangent function. So step 1 says all students take chemistry. Tangent is positive because that's positive 1.232435. So all students take chemistry says tangent is positive in quadrants 1 and 3. So we'll write down quadrants 1 and 3. That's where our answers are coming from. The next step is to get the reference angle from our calculator. So we're going to type in second tangent of 1.2435. And this reference angle is 51 degrees rounded. So we'll write that down, 51 degrees. And then we figure out theta. Well, we have a quadrant 1 answer. The theta value is the same thing as the reference angle. We don't have to do any calculations on that. And in quadrant 3, the reference angle, theta, is equal to 180 degrees plus the reference angle, 51. 180 plus 51 is 231 degrees. And that's our other answer. So we got 2 answers on that one. The next example, oh look, tangent goes negative. So when we do our all students take chemistry, a negative tangent turns out in quadrants 2 and 4. So we'll write down where they're coming from. Those answers are coming from. Quadrants 2 and 4. Step 2 says find the reference angle. And we're going to remember, put second tangent of the positive number, 0.8731. Second tangent of 0.8731. You should be doing this along with me with your calculators, making sure you get the exact same thing that I do. And this reference angle is 41 degrees. And now we have an answer from quadrant 2. What is the theta value? Well, theta in quadrant 2 is 180 degrees minus 41 degrees, and I believe that would be 139 degrees. And our other answer comes from quadrant 4. Well, we haven't had a quadrant 4 answer yet, but quadrant 4 is, if you check the other page, it is 360 degrees minus the reference angle. So 360 minus 41 is 319 degrees. So there are the 2 angles for that example number 4. And then to finish this whole thing up, maybe you want to try this one on your own. See if you can get this answer on your own. You can shut the video off and try to go through those 3 steps on your own. And if you get these right, then you know you're good to go. And you'll be all set. You'll know everything you'll need to know for this test that's coming up on Thursday of this week. All right. Step 1. All students take chemistry. Cosine is a positive number. And where is cosine positive? It's positive in quadrants 1 and 4. And now we get a reference angle out of our calculator. Second cosine of 0.5582. And the reference angle turns out to be 56 degrees. Our quadrant 1 answer, theta is the same thing as the reference angle, 56 degrees. There's one answer. And in quadrant 4, a quadrant 4 theta value is 360 degrees minus the reference angle. And I'll bet that's 304. So there's everything you need to know about finding 2 values of an angle, of 2 values of theta between 0 and 360 when you're given a cosine or a sine or a tangent. And sometimes you're given it positive and sometimes you're giving it negative, but it doesn't matter because all students take chemistry will tell you what quadrants they're coming from. And that's it for today.